So if you see here, actually you need to sync all of your aspects of problem solving with the clients at every stage, right? And that forms the core and the theme, which I think a lot of people here got right. Now I'll just take you through some 6-7 steps that typically how we think about a problem or approach a particular problem. And these will also apply to your case problem solving, right? You should keep this in mind as you go along. So defining the problem is the first and the most important aspect. And I will maybe keep giving you some snippets about how I did it during my case interview preparation as well, right? I probably appeared for about 10 to 12 case interviews across the consulting firms for my summers as well as finals placements, right? Now within this, I think defining the problem, what it means is you figure out whether the client and yourself are on the same page with respect to what the problem is, right? So when the client is saying they want to increase sales, for example, right? That's a very, very broad statement to make. That might not be the actual problem that the client is trying to solve. Maybe they are trying to increase the sales by moving it, by moving the mix of the products that they're selling, right? And not just purely increasing sales. So if they have a cash cow, which they've been selling all along, right? And it forms like 90% of their sales. And they come and tell you that I want to increase the sales. You can't go after the 90% and increase that further, right? You need to actually think about and ask the client, where do they want the additional sales to come from, right? Do they have a thought in mind on which part of the company are they trying to expand? Now that kind of an alignment has to be established at the beginning so that you know what you're trying to solve for and you're not boiling the ocean. Because typically management consulting problems begin with a very, very broad problem statement. So you have to figure out the contours of the problem with the client, right? Asking them questions like, what aspects are you okay to play with, right? What kind of risk are you willing to take? What is your definition of the problem? What is your understanding of the things that need attention? Those parts are already defined at the very beginning, right? So there's almost a initial session with the client where we say, we've heard you over a course of like 3 or 4 conversations in the past, where you've given us a sense of what your problem is. I just want to synthesize what my understanding of the problem comes to, right? Through those 3-4 conversations. And we sit down with the client over a course of a 1 hour or 1.5 hour conversation with not just maybe the CEO who would have been signing the contract, but also his core leadership, right? To say that this is the broad problem we'll now take up and solve for you in the coming period of the project. Now that is super critical to do. Otherwise, we'll get lost and we'll be pulled in all directions by the entire leadership of the organization, right? So it's important that everyone is on the same page to begin with. Then what we do is like a closed group discussion within the management consulting team, right? So like the consulting firm, the individuals on the project will get into a joint problem solving session, sometimes with the client, sometimes they will do it initially at their own end. We will try and structure the problem, right? Which is what you do in a case problem solving, right? You figure out if there's a profitability problem for a specific product, then you have to figure out whether the revenues per product are low or if there is a problem on the cost side, right? Or then within the cost side, is it a fixed cost problem or a variable cost problem? Within the revenue side, is it a problem of number of units being sold or the prices being too low or your product mix being wrong, right? Those are the kinds of structuring that you typically adopt, right? And we would break down the problem into multiple parts. Now, in the context of a real life case, what happens is the structuring the problem also has to go in hand with the allocation of resources. Now, by that, I mean, and again, this sort of an insight you also should keep either when you are solving a problem or you being a management consultant are put on a team. So when there's a large problem that someone is trying to solve, you have to break it into such a way that individual aspects of the structure can be allocated for respective individuals to solve, right? Because what happens is ultimately one person will take up ownership of a chunk of the problem and go in their own direction and try and solve it independently, right? While trying to syndicate with the other associate or the manager on the project, saying that whether I am moving in the right direction and what implication does my work stream have on yours, right? So that is super important, right? Structuring the problem just for the sake of showing your understanding and comprehensiveness may be important in a case setting, in an interview setting, but is absolutely critical in the case of a real life problem where that entails the allocation of work and responsibility within the project, right? So for the work streams that I would be working on, I will be taking the leadership on the solution that we come to, and we have to also get the client's buy-in at the end on that particular solution. Now, after structuring the problem, we'll also prioritize the issues, which is the classic Pareto principle, right? 80-20. You have to figure out through our hypothesis which aspects of the structure are most likely to be broken, right? And therefore, you focus your energies on that first, because you want to get the maximum impact in the minimum amount of time possible. Like we were discussing in the previous slides, the consultants are typically working against very, very steep deadlines. And in that particular case, it's important that we focus on the right things instead of, trying to solve for everything in the mix and not really leading to any critical impact towards the end. Then we, after prioritizing, we obviously analyze, figure out what analysis need to be conducted for the respective problems that we are trying to tackle. So for example, if you were to say that I have a marketing problem, right, where I'm not being able to gather, where I'm not being able to onboard enough customers per month, right, while my competitor is getting a huge number of new customers every month or every week, I'm at a very, very slow run rate. Now, while that seems like a problem of us not being able to cater to customers, there might genuinely be a problem of not enough lead flow to begin with, right? And that lead flow could be a result of wrong marketing channels being deployed. Now, within the marketing channels to be deployed, we figured out the prioritized issue is the digital marketing channel not even being there at a good enough scale in the present times, right? So now we need to go back and say what analysis do we conduct and what work do we plan in order to ramp up their digital marketing efforts, right? What is the scope of what exists today? So you understand the as-is situation of the client, and you say what next needs to be conducted versus what exists in the industry as a best practice. So what you will hear as a consultant very, very often is what's the best in class method, right? So the consultants are expected to bring the industry's best practices to your firm, right, as a client. So that's what the consultants will look for. They will understand what the client's current situation is, what is the best thing happening in the industry, and then they will try and figure out how to bridge that gap. That is what we do at the planning, analysis, and work. Then we conduct those analysis, obviously, which is to do with a lot of Excel work, right, which consultants typically use. That's their core tool. And then we, synthesize the findings and present it in a lot of the presentation PPTs, right? So this is the broad framework for problem solving. And this is applicable across the kinds of problems that I talked about previously, right? Which is to do with business growth, operation strategy, like someone was saying. It could be with respect to marketing. It could be with respect to recovery transformation services. Any of those will typically go through this cycle. And while we might keep switching back and forth between this, right, for the various aspects of the problem, and we might sometimes not need to spend a lot of time on each step. And while some steps might involve a lot of trouble, some others might not. But this is the broad framework that we always follow. Any questions at this stage on the problem solving methodology or approach that consultants typically follow?
Yes, hi, this is Vikram this side. I have a question.
Sure, Vikram, go on.
So this is an example on like if I'm on the job and if there is a real life problem, how do I solve it and go about the case and all. Suppose I'm in an interview setting and there is an interviewer in front of me.
Yeah.
So while you mention sync with the client at each stage, does it mean that at every point in time, like on the define the problem or structure the problem, we go back to the interviewer and ask questions or present our findings, or what does it really mean?
Sure. So I think that's a very good question, Vikram. And that is absolutely what you do also, right? So if I remember my case interviews, I would have an A4 sheet that we were solving the problem on. And in the context that I was in, we were in a in-person setting, so not in a virtual setting there. But then what used to happen was we were across the table. So the interviewer could almost see what I was writing on the paper. And my paper would also be very, very structured, right? Maybe that's how I got in. The left-hand side of the page, I used to typically talk about what we've understood about the problem, which is define the problem. So I would ask the interviewer the questions that I needed to in order to figure out the contours of the problem. So typically when they say, there's a client who's struggling has seen some 50% decline in net profits over the last 6 months, right? Maybe that's the kind of problem statement you get. Then what we do is, on the first part, we figure out who the client is, what industry are they in, what is the competition doing, what are the products that we are dealing in. Is this a problem that is just for us, or is it something that is more broad based and across the industry, right? And at that stage, I will say, is this a fair understanding of the problem, right? That our client is the only one who's facing this problem, has faced this problem for the first time in their lifetime, is facing this problem with respect to this particular product line not doing well suddenly, right? And you syndicate. That's the level of syncing that I'm talking about. If there's something that you've understood wrong or captured incorrectly through the problem, then the interviewer will flag it out to you, right? You just need to play back what you've understood and what your approach is to the interviewer. Even for the structure, right? Like I said, there could be 10 things that you could highlight as the structure, and I could break it down to a first level, second level, like I was doing with the profitability. Revenue minus costs. Revenue can be broken down into volume, price per unit, revenue mix. Cost can be broken down into fixed, variable. Fixed can further be broken down into different kinds of fixed costs. Variable can be per unit costs, raw material, whatever, labor, etc., etc. Right? Now, within this, you might have a hypothesis based on the industry that you are solving the case for, but you need to go back to the interviewer and say, do you think this is the right aspect of the problem to focus on to begin with, or do you want me to focus on some other aspect? That's where you are basically trying to prioritize the issues with the interviewer. And on the structure also, right? When you draw out the structure and the interviewer is looking at it, he or she is most likely to give you feedback in case you are going too wrong. So I think this is a super important slide, because this is exactly what we do. And the more you follow this, the more likely you are to succeed at either your job or at the interview.